You're watching One on One. We're speaking with primatologist, anthropologist and activist Dr. Jane Goodall. I'd like to know where the turning point was for you, though, where you really realized that this was a dream come true, where you said, okay, the things I wanted to do, I finally got a chance to do. Was it when you'd got out there to Africa and were out there for the very first time?
I think it was when I went with Leakey on that first safari, because, you know, all my childhood I dreamt of being in Africa. And when I was out there, there was nobody there then. I mean, we saw maybe 4 Maasai warriors in the whole 3 months, just animals, and so many animals back then. And I was sharing a tent with one other young English girl, and so I would wake up in the morning into my dream, whereas usually you leave your dream behind. It was you know, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, here I am, I've made it, I'm here.
When you set up first time around Lake Tanzania, or Lake Tanganyika as it was then, with your mother in tow, how did you adjust to that complete change in lifestyle from your childhood in Britain?
It wasn't. It was my dream. It was real. I had no adjustment at all. The adjustments were when I came back again into civilization with, you know, the noise and the pollution and the waste and all that. That was very hard to adjust to. But going out there, I just felt at home.
I understood it was quite meditative, just being out there and having to obviously have long, quiet moments and watch. You find that that's something that's now obviously helped you deal with a lot of the stresses of coming back into the sort of crazy lifestyle that you have.
Well, I think so. I mean, one thing people always say about me is, how can you be so peaceful when everything's chaotic around? And I think that's a very, very useful thing to have developed, and probably saved gastric ulcers and stress and all those things.
Was there any one moment, a memory that burned into your mind, for example, when studying the chimps, something that was so powerful and such a strong experience that it really stayed with you, you couldn't forget?
Yeah, I think the most significant of all was this one chimpanzee, David Greybeard, who first lost his fear, who in a way helped me walk through a doorway into a magic world, the world of the wild chimps. And at first I would just sit and watch, and then when he left I would let him go because I felt that was polite. But after a while I was able to follow him, and he led me through this thorny thicket, and I was sure I'd lost him, you know, because you get caught up and you're tangled in your hair and your clothes. And when I pushed through, he was sitting as though waiting, maybe he was, and so I sat down near him. And there was a ripe fruit on the ground, which the chimps like, but obviously this one was probably a bit bad or something. Anyway, I held it out to him, and he turned his head away. So I pushed my hand closer. He turned around, he looked directly into my eyes. He took the fruit and dropped it, but at the same time he very gently squeezed my fingers, which is how chimpanzees reassure each other. So that it was a direct communication, perhaps predating the evolution of language, our spoken language, and we understood each other perfectly. And it was, you know, it was a really significant moment for me.
Now, presumably Louis Leakey and his wife Mary were strong mentors for you. You expressed your mother was obviously a very big influence. Who else do you consider mentors in your life?
Well, definitely my dog Rusty and the chimpanzee David Greybeard and Flo. I mean, they taught me. I mean, you know, because I hadn't done university, and because I didn't have a series of theories to prove like people do today, I was there to learn from them, to listen to them. And so I do count them as my mentors. And them with Louis Leakey and my mother, they were the key ones that developed me up to that time in my life.
I know another protege of Louis Leakey was Diane Fossey, of course, who was studying gorillas, and they made the movie Gorillas in the Mist about her. Sadly, very sadly killed by, they believe, poachers, or at least people against her work, in 1985. How well did you know her, by the way?
I knew her very well. She came to Gombe before she ever began studying the gorillas, and she spent a Christmas with us when she was thrown out by the Ugandan fighting or whatever it was. So I knew her very well indeed.
Of course, she paid with her life for something she believed in, and by people presumably who didn't want her achieving the kind of positive goals she wanted to. Did you ever in your work fear that you might encounter the same kind of threat? Did you ever worry about your own situation?
You see, Diane and I had very different ways of going about what we did. I, from the beginning, was involving the local people. I had them, first of all, they were just carrying students' knapsacks and stuff, but it was very obvious that these people who lived there around were, you know, they would be the continuity that was so desperately needed. And so they were built in as a research team. They learned how to study the chimps. They followed them better than anybody else, knew more about them. And they talked about the chimps in the villages, and they loved them just like we do. Diane wouldn't employ any of the local people to go anywhere near the gorillas. That was to be only her, because she felt that that would make the gorillas more vulnerable to poaching. And I said, but Diane, you know, if I have some of my Tanzanians following the chimps and they meet a fisherman that they don't know, the chimps hide, they know the difference. Your gorillas will too. And then I said, you know, if you get these people on your side in the villages, that's going to help the gorillas. It has to. But she didn't see that.
Of course, you're a great advocate for education and change, and you founded Roots and Shoots, educating and encouraging activism among young people. What was the reasoning behind setting up something like that, and what sort of result do you hope to achieve with that?
Well, it all started because in '86 there was a big conference called Understanding Chimpanzees, and it brought together all the people studying chimps from across Africa for the first time. Session on conservation showed everywhere chimpanzee habitats being destroyed. Chimp numbers had dropped at that time from about 1 million, more than 1 million, down to, I suppose, then about 300,000. It's about 150,000 now. And, you know, so I knew that I couldn't go on living this wonderful life of being out in the forest and collecting data and doing a bit of teaching at Stanford. So from that moment, October '86, I've been traveling the world approximately 300 days a year, and at first raising issues about chimps, conservation, forests, human population growth, learning more and more about the interconnection of all these things, you know, with the spread of the desert and the worsening droughts and floods and the crippling poverty and the hunger and the disease and the ethnic violence. I mean, all of this seemed to be tied together. And so much of it could be laid at the unsustainable lifestyles of the elite communities all around the world. And so I felt it was important to start talking about these issues outside Africa and Europe, America, and increasingly Asia. And everywhere I went were young people who seemed to have lost hope for the future. They were depressed, they were bitter and angry, or they were just apathetic. Why? We believe that you've compromised our future and there's nothing we can do about it. This was the answer I got again and again. We have compromised their future. We've stolen it, a lot of it. But there is something that can be done about it. And this Roots and Shoots program, the symbolism of it, a seed, little tiny roots to reach the water can break through a brick wall, the little tiny shoot to reach the sun can break through. Hundreds and thousands of young people around the world can break through the brick walls of all the problems that we've inflicted and make this a better world. And they choose projects to make things better for their own human community, animals around them, including domestic, my dear dogs, and the environment that we all share, and running through it a thread of learning to live in peace and harmony in their communities, between cultures, between religions, and with the natural world.
Now, you're in your 70s, if you don't mind me admitting that.
Nearly 74.
Wow. Well,
very, very nearly.
Now, having reached your 70s, though, with your mother and your aunt reaching their 90s, God bless them, and wish you a long life too, what price do you think you've paid for the kind of crazy schedule that you keep?
Well, I've had less time with my son and grandchildren than I probably would otherwise have had, although looking at people's lifestyles, I think I probably had more time with my son because I had him with me in the field and, you know, for a long time. But apart from that, I don't know. I have lost my own private life. I don't have the time I really want for writing. I love writing, and I'd like to write a lot more. I'd have to write between times and, you know, maximum 3-week stretches, which isn't the way to write. But otherwise, I don't know. I've been to some amazing places. I've met some incredible people. I've had demonstrated again and again the indomitable human spirit and the immense power and courage and determination of young people if they know the problems and if they are empowered to take action. And that's what Roots and Shoots is. They choose what to do, and they do it.
I know, of course, your legacy will be somewhat tied to your pioneering research on chimpanzees, but how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as somebody who cared, because I do care, and I care very much about the future for my grandchildren and everybody else's grandchildren. And I care desperately about the future of the rainforest and the amazing beings who live in them.
Jane Goodall, wish you a lot of luck and a long life. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.